The federal government says it's laying down billions for environmental conservation in a plan to protect almost a third of the country. Today, the Liberals announced their updated nature strategy, along with $3.8 billion in funding. The plan says it can hit Canada's goal of preserving 30% of its land by 2030 and looks to protect almost as much of Canada's water at 28%. To do that, the strategy is promising to create up to 10 more national parks, 15 urban parks, and up to 14 marine protected areas. At that announcement today, reporters also asked the Prime Minister about Ottawa and Alberta's pipeline push. Their MOU sets an April 1st deadline for multiple key deals, and two of them still aren't in place.
Premier Smith and I had, with colleagues, a very constructive conversation yesterday. Will we perfectly meet the first? Not necessarily, but do we have momentum? We're making progress? Yes. We'll get the right agreement at the right time, but I anticipate soon.
Julie Dabrusin is the Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Nature. Welcome back to the program, Minister.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I certainly do want to get to the nature strategy in a moment, but I am going to ask you, tomorrow is the deadline for Ottawa and Alberta to reach these 4 agreements under the Memorandum of Understanding. There's still no deal on industrial carbon pricing or on building the Pathways carbon capture project. Now, your government has said these are environmental pieces that are key if there is going to be a new pipeline to the West Coast. What message does it send to industry if you're already missing a couple of deadlines?
Well, let me take a step back, and I'm really looking forward to speaking about the nature announcement, because today is an amazing day when we're talking about the environment and protection for the environment, but and also, frankly, how we build projects. So we can get into that in a little bit. But if I was going to talk about the Alberta MOU specifically, there has already been a fair bit of progress. And so, for example, we have a cooperation agreement with Alberta now that went out in draft for consultations. Those consultations ended on Friday. And so now we're just in the finalizing process, but that was a big step forward. We also have an agreement in principle on methane, which is actually one of the most important ways for how we reduce emissions. And Canada just strengthened and enhanced our methane regulations in December. So this is an important step forward too in how we're working. And we do have some other pieces that we need to continue to negotiate on, as the Prime Minister said at the announcement today. But progress is being made, and I think it's important that we're at the table and having these conversations, and that we're seeing the progress coming out in steps as we are.
Yeah, and two out of the 4 things that you were hoping to hit by this deadline. The Prime Minister saying he had a lengthy conversation with Premier Smith yesterday. Is Alberta still committed to an industrial carbon price of $130 per tonne?
That's what's in our Memorandum of Understanding, and we know, and they know, because they would be hearing it from industry as well, that a strong, predictable industrial carbon price is important. That's what industry is looking for. They're looking for that certainty, and so we need to continue to work towards that. You can get really nerdy in the details when we start talking about an industrial carbon price, so there are pieces that still need to be worked out. I think it's really important that in this moment, we're all at the table, we're having that conversation, and that, as the Prime Minister said, there'll be more to say soon. I don't want to get too much into the details of a negotiation out here in the public, because we know it's progressing well at the table, and that's really where it's important.
I would like, on the temperature check, I think the big picture concern, not getting nerdy in the details if that's okay, is the concern by environmental groups that you're going to put too much water in your wine, that you're going to ease up on the industrial carbon price. Maybe we won't see the same level of commitment to a carbon capture and storage facility. Maybe it gets smaller. What would you say to groups who are worried that you're going to back off here or lower the bar, in environmental groups?
I would categorically say that we are not lowering the bar. And I think that's really important for Canadians to hear. And so I'm glad to have the chance to repeat that. We need an effective industrial carbon price. Right now, it's not working like it should right across our country. And so we have 2 pieces. We have the MOU and the conversation that we're having right now about the Alberta MOU. But in addition, we're also working as a government on how do we strengthen the industrial carbon price. And that was set out in our budget in 2025 about the steps that we need to do to strengthen the industrial carbon price. So there are many different pieces coming together nationally, but also about how this MOU fits within that larger conversation. But just as we're talking today, or will be talking today, about the nature investments that we made, we're actually doubling down on making sure that we're like have a strong protection for nature, that we're getting to 30 by 30 on the nature file. And we are absolutely committed to continuing to work to move our country towards a low carbon economy.
One more question before we get to that nature strategy that you agreed to come on to talk about today. I know, and the questions are coming, but I just want, again, because this other issue also has big national implications. You're saying no water in the wine, we're not lowering the bar. I want to understand, does that mean to your mind that a pipeline to the West Coast is still a real possibility as well?
Look, those are all part of the negotiations for the MOU, and I think that it's we have to actually get to the point where we have the final agreements to talk about it. But Prime Minister has been clear that when we're talking about something like a pipeline, that you have to have agreement from British Columbia, from Indigenous peoples. There are a lot of steps, but those are the conversations that are happening at the table. Okay. And I think maybe if I can get to the nature piece, one of the most interesting pieces, I think. We can talk about the national parks and the like too, but is on how do we build Canada well when we're talking about major projects. And there's an entire pillar to this nature plan about how do we make sure that we're mapping out carbon-rich, biodiverse rich regions, so that we actually are able to work with, when people come forward as proponents for a project, that they know in advance the areas that need stronger protections, that need to be avoided potentially. And at the same time, it makes it faster for us on the permitting side to be able to allow projects when we know in advance where we need to be, where are the areas of greater protection, where are the areas that are actually easier to go ahead with a project. So if we're going into the announcement that was today that we did, it also does involve thinking about how do we build Canada and how do we build these projects.
Part of this announcement today, the $3.8 billion, as you say, new national parks, marine conservation sites, more. But you said you cannot do it with public money alone. There's this question of catalyzing private investments. Just how much of this plan to conserve almost 30% of Canada does the private sector need to pay for?
So, when we look at, for example, just this summer, I was in Northwest Territories where we announced a project for permanence that protects 30% of the Northwest Territories. It's about 2% of Canada's landmass. It was done in partnership with 21 Indigenous nations. That was something that is through the PFP process. It's public dollars, but it's also with matching from philanthropic dollars that add to it and help us to be able to move forward with that kind of project. So there's a long history of actually using public funds to help catalyze private or philanthropic investments. And so that's but just to say that project alone adds 2% as we go to our 30 by 30 targets, which is what we're committed to doing.
Obviously, and so I'd love to just better understand, based on what you said there, I would put philanthropic in a different bucket than private industry. To what extent do you see the balance here? I mean, this is a time of uncertainty for a lot of private industry. Is this primarily, to your mind, coming from philanthropic groups, or are you expecting industry to step up as well?
Well, that gets me to talk a bit about the third pillar, which is there is actually an expert task force that's being put together specifically to actually look at how do we value nature, but also how do we mobilize capital for nature. And so that's part of actually what this nature plan is going to be looking at, is how do we better mobilize capital that isn't public dollars, and at the same time, what's that mix, those kinds of questions that you're raising. So hope to have a whole lot more to talk about on that. But philanthropic dollars and even private dollars have helped with many of the projects that we announced. I mentioned the PFP for Northwest Territories, but also I was in British Columbia in December where we announced protection for for an area in the Kootenays. It's a grizzly bear habitat. That also was in partnership with Indigenous peoples, the government of British Columbia, the federal government, and private industry. Because the real thing to think about is that the federal government, like federal lands are only 6% of the lands across Canada. I think 76% is provincial. Like, we need to work in partnership with provinces and territories, with Indigenous peoples, with private ownership, if we're going to get to 30 by 30 targets, because frankly, federal government lands don't even account for 30% of our country.
We just have a moment left, but I guess I'd like to end by getting a better sense of how you think about this. I mean, is this commitment to protecting these parts of Canada part of a trade-off if we're going to make these massive investments in these big infrastructure projects that are obviously going to have environmental consequences? How do you view it?
I see today as a day where we get to proudly stand up and say that we know that nature is very important to Canadians. We know that access to nature is very important to Canadians, and that we have a plan, and it's set out clearly in this document about how we're going to get to 30 by 30. That's a doubling down on what we know we need to do to protect nature. And it's a great day for Canada and for Canadians when we get to say we announced 2 new parks, right, with the Seal River Park and Eastern James Bay. We already have like investments that we had announced previously just in the past week for marine conservation areas. There is work that's moving forward ahead on protecting the lands and waters of our country. We're the second largest country in the world. We have the longest coastline in the world. When we make these protections, we're actually helping move the baseline for the whole world, because we have so much of this to protect. And we're doing that. This is a really great day to be proud as Canadians that we're doing a lot of heavy lifting to protect nature, and we're doing it in a way that's really a leader for the world.
Okay, Minister, listen, I appreciate your time and taking all of the questions today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Julie Dabrusin, Minister of the Environment, Climate Change and Nature.